Captain Sarah Chen had heard every joke in the book about women pilots. She'd endured the snickers, the eye rolls, and the whispered comments that followed her through the halls of Blackwater Military Base. But nothing prepared her for the reaction when Colonel Martinez announced she would be the primary pilot for the new Griffin HX-9 stealth helicopter. The briefing room fell silent. 23 experienced pilots stared at her like she'd just announced she was going to fly to the moon using a paper airplane. The Griffin HX-9 wasn't just any aircraft. It was the most advanced military helicopter ever built, worth more than the annual budget of most small countries. Its stealth capabilities were so classified that even looking at detailed schematics required security clearance that most generals didn't have. "You've got to be kidding me," muttered Lieutenant Colonel Jake Harrison from the back row. His voice carried just loud enough for everyone to hear, but not quite loud enough for Colonel Martinez to call him out on it. Harrison was old-school military, the kind of man who believed that certain jobs were meant for certain people, and flying cutting-edge military aircraft wasn't meant for women. Sarah kept her face neutral, though her hands clenched slightly in her lap. She'd learned long ago that showing emotion only gave them more ammunition. Instead, she focused on Colonel Martinez as he continued the briefing, outlining the Griffin's capabilities and the importance of the upcoming mission. The Griffin HX-9 was a marvel of engineering. Its rotors were designed with noise-dampening technology that made it nearly silent in flight. The hull was coated with radar-absorbing materials that made it invisible to most detection systems. Inside, the cockpit was equipped with advanced navigation systems, threat detection arrays, and communication equipment that could maintain contact with command centers anywhere in the world. But the most impressive feature was its defensive capabilities. The Griffin could deploy countermeasures against incoming missiles, had armor plating that could withstand small arms fire, and was equipped with electronic warfare systems that could jam enemy communications and radar. It was less of a helicopter and more of a flying fortress. After the briefing, Sarah made her way to the hangar where the Griffin was housed. The massive aircraft sat under bright lights, its black surface seeming to absorb the illumination around it. Technicians moved around it like priests tending to a sacred object, checking systems and running diagnostics. Chief Warrant Officer Mike Torres, the lead mechanic, looked up as she approached. Unlike many of the pilots, Torres had always treated Sarah with respect. He judged people by their competence, not their gender, and Sarah had proven herself competent many times over. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Torres said, patting the Griffin's hull affectionately. "Took us 3 months just to learn all her systems. The manual is thicker than a phone book from the old days." Sarah ran her hand along the aircraft's surface. The metal was smooth and cool to the touch, but she could feel the power contained within. "What's the real story on why they picked me for this?" Torres glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Word is, the brass wanted someone with a clean record. No disciplinary actions, no accidents, no incidents that might raise questions. Your file is spotless, Chen. Plus, you've got more flight hours than any other pilot on base in the same rank. And the fact that I'm a woman probably doesn't hurt," Torres admitted. "This whole program is getting a lot of attention from Washington. Having a female pilot makes for good publicity if things go well." Sarah nodded. She'd suspected as much. In today's military, image mattered almost as much as capability. But she didn't care about the politics. She cared about flying, and the Griffin was the most advanced aircraft she'd ever had the chance to pilot. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into learning everything about the Griffin. She studied technical manuals until her eyes burned. She spent hours in the simulator, practicing emergency procedures and familiarizing herself with the aircraft's systems. She memorized specifications, performance parameters, and maintenance requirements. The other pilots watched her with a mixture of amusement and skepticism. During lunch in the mess hall, she could hear their conversations. "Give it a month," said Captain Richards, a veteran pilot with 15 years of experience. "The first time she faces real combat conditions, she'll crack. Flying a desk and flying into hostile territory are two different things." "I heard she's never even been in a real firefight," added Lieutenant Thompson. "All her experience is training exercises and transport missions." The Griffin needs someone who can handle pressure. Sarah ignored the comments, but they stung. It was true that most of her combat experience was limited. She'd flown support missions and reconnaissance flights, but she'd never been in a situation where enemy forces were actively trying to shoot her down. The military had been careful to keep her in relatively safe assignments, partly because of her value as a pilot, and partly because of the political complications that would arise if something happened to one of the few female helicopter pilots in active service. But Sarah knew she was ready for more. She'd proven herself in every training exercise, scored higher than most of her male counterparts on every test, and had never made a mistake that endangered her crew or aircraft. She was tired of being protected and was eager to show what she could really do. The opportunity came sooner than expected. General Patricia Hayes, one of the highest-ranking female officers in the military, was scheduled to visit several forward operating bases in a region where insurgent activity had been increasing. The visits were partly ceremonial and partly practical, as General Hayes was conducting a review of security procedures and troop morale in areas where recent intelligence suggested possible threats. Originally, the plan was for General Hayes to travel by armored convoy, but intelligence reports indicated that roadside bombs had become a significant threat along the planned route. The decision was made to transport her by helicopter instead, and the Griffin HX-9 was selected for the mission due to its advanced defensive capabilities. When Colonel Martinez announced that Sarah would be piloting the mission, the reaction was immediate and intense. "Sir, with all due respect," Harrison said, standing up during the mission briefing, "this is General Hayes we're talking about. She's not just any VIP. She's one of the most important military leaders we have. Don't you think this mission requires someone with more combat experience?" Colonel Martinez fixed Harrison with a steady stare. "Captain Chen has been selected for this mission based on her qualifications and her familiarity with the Griffin systems. Are you questioning my judgment, Lieutenant Colonel?" Harrison backed down, but Sarah could see the anger in his eyes. After the briefing, several other pilots approached her with similar concerns, though they were more diplomatic in their language. "Sarah, we're just worried," said Captain Martinez, no relation to the colonel. "This isn't about your abilities as a pilot. It's about the stakes. If something goes wrong with a general on board, it becomes an international incident. I'm leading." Sarah appreciated that some of them seemed genuinely concerned rather than simply dismissive, but their lack of confidence still frustrated her. "I understand the stakes," she replied. "That's exactly why they're sending the best aircraft we have, with someone who knows its systems better than anyone else on base." The mission was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Sarah spent the weekend doing final preparations, checking and double-checking every system on the Griffin. She reviewed intelligence reports about the areas they would be flying over, studied weather forecasts, and planned alternate routes in case they encountered problems. On Monday evening, she was in the hangar doing one last inspection when General Hayes arrived. Sarah had seen the general before during official ceremonies, but had never met her personally. General Hayes was in her early 50s, with silver-gray hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She had a reputation for being tough, but fair, demanding excellence from everyone under her command, regardless of their background. "Captain Chen," General Hayes said as she approached, "I wanted to meet my pilot before tomorrow's mission." Sarah snapped to attention and saluted. "It's an honor to serve as your pilot, General. I've been reading your file," General Hayes continued. "Impressive record, top of your class at flight school, consistently high marks on all evaluations, and according to Chief Torres, you know this aircraft better than the engineers who designed it. I take my responsibilities seriously." "Oh, ma'am." General Hayes smiled slightly. "I'm sure you've heard the talk around base. Some people have concerns about having a woman pilot for this mission." Sarah chose her words carefully. "I'm aware that some people have reservations, General. I hope to prove that their concerns are unfounded." "I don't have any concerns," General Hayes said firmly. "I've flown with many pilots over the years, and I can tell the difference between someone who knows their job and someone who just thinks they do. Colonel Martinez wouldn't have assigned you to this mission if he didn't have complete confidence in your abilities, and that's good enough for me." The conversation was brief, but it meant more to Sarah than the general probably realized. Knowing that she had the confidence of both her commanding officer and the person she would be protecting made her feel more prepared for the mission ahead. Tuesday morning arrived clear and cool. Sarah arrived at the hangar before dawn to begin her pre-flight inspection. The Griffin had been fueled and loaded with all necessary equipment for the mission. In addition to General Hayes, they would be carrying her aide, Major Williams, and a security detail consisting of 2 Special Forces soldiers. As Sarah worked through her checklist, other personnel began arriving. The security team was professional and efficient, checking their equipment and reviewing the mission plan one final time. Major Williams was a quiet, efficient officer who had worked with General Hayes for several years and knew her preferences and procedures. The flight plan was straightforward on paper. They would fly to 3 different forward operating bases, spending approximately 2 hours at each location. The total flight time would be about 4 hours, covering roughly 600 miles of terrain that ranged from mountainous regions to desert flatlands. But Sarah knew that no mission was ever as simple as it looked on paper. Weather could change, mechanical problems could develop, and intelligence reports didn't always reflect the current situation on the ground. She had contingency plans for various scenarios, but she also knew that real-world situations often required improvisation and quick thinking. At 8 o'clock, General Hayes arrived with her entourage. She was dressed in standard military fatigues and carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her aide and security detail fell into formation around her as they walked toward the Griffin. "Good morning, Captain," General Hayes said as she approached the helicopter. "Are we ready to fly?" "Yes, ma'am. All systems are green and we're cleared for departure." As the passengers boarded, Sarah could see other personnel watching from around the hangar. Some faces showed genuine interest in seeing the new aircraft in action. Others displayed skepticism about the mission or the pilot. A few seemed to be waiting for something to go wrong so they could say they had predicted it. Sarah pushed those thoughts aside and focused on her job. She completed her final systems check, received clearance from the control tower, and began the engine startup sequence. The Griffin's rotors began to turn slowly, then increased speed until they became a blur overhead. The aircraft lifted smoothly off the ground with barely a vibration. As they rose into the morning sky, Sarah felt the familiar rush of excitement that came with flying. The Griffin responded to her controls, like an extension of her own body, smooth and precise in every movement. Below them, the military base grew smaller, until it looked like a collection of toy buildings arranged on a table. The first leg of their journey took them over mountainous terrain dotted with small villages and farming communities. The view was spectacular, with snow-capped peaks rising into a brilliant blue sky. Sarah monitored her instruments constantly while enjoying the scenery, checking fuel consumption, engine performance, and navigation systems. General Hayes sat in the passenger compartment, reviewing documents and occasionally looking out the windows. She seemed completely at ease, as if flying in military helicopters was just another routine part of her job. Which it probably was. The first stop went smoothly. They landed at Forward Operating Base Alpha, where General Hayes conducted her inspection and met with local commanders. Sarah remained with the aircraft, conducting routine maintenance checks and monitoring radio traffic for any updates on conditions along their planned route. The base commander, Colonel Rodriguez, approached her while she worked. "First time flying the Griffin in the field?" he asked. "Yes, sir. But everything's working perfectly. She handles like a dream. I heard there was some controversy about the pilot assignment for this mission." Sarah looked up from her checklist. "There's always controversy about something, sir. I'm just focused on doing my job." Colonel Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. For what it's worth, I've seen your training records. If I needed someone to fly my family out of a combat zone, I'd want you at the controls." The comment boosted Sarah's confidence. Colonel Rodriguez was known as a straight shooter who didn't hand out compliments lightly. If he had faith in her abilities, it meant she was earning respect through her performance rather than just political correctness. The second stop was at Forward Operating Base Bravo, located in a more remote area where intelligence reports suggested increased insurgent activity. Sarah noticed increased radio chatter and more personnel on alert status, but the visit proceeded without incident. It was during the third leg of their journey, flying toward Forward Operating Base Charlie, that everything changed. The warning came through Sarah's headset as a sharp, urgent voice from base control. Griffin 1. This is Overwatch. We have multiple hostile contacts moving toward your position. Recommend immediate course change to avoid potential engagement zone. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, checking defensive systems and preparing for evasive action. In the passenger compartment, she could see General Hayes looking up from her documents. Alert but calm. Overwatch, Griffin 1. Can you specify the nature of the threat? Sarah responded while banking the aircraft into a wide turn that would take them away from the reported danger zone. Griffin 1. Intelligence indicates at least 3 vehicles with mounted weapon systems. They appear to be positioning for an ambush along your planned route to Charlie Base. We're tracking them now, but recommend you hold at current position until we can confirm the area is clear. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. Roger, Overwatch. Griffin 1 holding position and awaiting further instructions. She brought the helicopter into a stable hover about 2 miles from the suspected threat area. The Griffin's advanced sensors automatically began scanning the surrounding terrain, and Sarah could see multiple contact indicators appearing on her tactical display. The aircraft's computer systems were identifying potential threats and calculating optimal escape routes. In the passenger compartment, Major Williams was speaking quietly into his radio, coordinating with command centers and updating security protocols. The 2 Special Forces soldiers, Staff Sergeant Lopez and Corporal Johnson, had moved to positions where they could observe the surrounding area through the helicopter's windows. General Hayes unbuckled her harness and moved forward to the cockpit area. Captain, what's our situation? Ma'am, we have potential hostile contacts in the area around our planned route. Command is recommending we hold position until the threat can be neutralized, or we can identify a safe, alternate route. How long could that take? Sarah checked her fuel gauges and calculated flight time remaining. We have enough fuel for approximately 3 hours of flight time, ma'am. If we're delayed much longer than that, we'll need to land and refuel somewhere. General Hayes studied the tactical display for a moment. What are those contacts there? She asked, pointing to several indicators on the screen. Those appear to be civilian vehicles, General. The computer is identifying them as non-threatening based on their movement patterns and signatures. The potential hostiles are these 3 contacts here. Sarah indicated the relevant symbols, moving in what appears to be a coordinated pattern toward our planned flight path. The radio crackled again. Griffin 1. Overwatch. We're getting additional reports of hostile activity in the region. Recommend you consider returning to Bravo Base until the situation is clarified. Sarah looked at General Hayes, waiting for direction. This was exactly the kind of situation that critics had worried about when she was assigned to the mission. How would she handle a real threat situation? Would she make the right decisions under pressure? General Hayes seemed to read her thoughts. Captain, this is your aircraft and your mission. What do you recommend? The question caught Sarah off guard. She had expected the general to make the decision about how to proceed. Being asked for her professional opinion showed a level of trust that she hadn't anticipated. Sarah studied her instruments and the tactical situation. The Griffin's sensors were providing detailed information about the surrounding area, and she could see several possible courses of action. They could return to Bravo Base, which was the safest option but would mean canceling the rest of the mission. They could wait for the threat to be neutralized, but that could take hours and would put them behind schedule. Or they could take an alternate route to Charlie Base that would avoid the known threat area. Ma'am, I recommend we take the northern route to Charlie Base. It's longer and takes us over more difficult terrain, but the Griffin's navigation systems can handle it, and intelligence shows no hostile activity in that area. We'd lose about 30 minutes, but we could still complete the mission on schedule. General Hayes nodded. That sounds reasonable. How confident are you in the aircraft's ability to handle the terrain along the northern route? Very confident, ma'am. The Griffin was designed for exactly this type of situation. The terrain will actually work in our favor because it makes it harder for ground-based threats to track us or set up ambush positions. Then let's do it. Major Williams, inform command that we're taking the northern route and will proceed to Charlie Base as planned. Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she changed course toward the alternate route. The general had asked for her professional opinion and then followed her recommendation. It was the kind of trust and respect that she had been working toward throughout her career. The northern route took them over mountainous terrain that was both beautiful and challenging. The Griffin handled the changing altitudes and wind patterns with ease, but Sarah had to constantly adjust for the complex air currents created by the mountain peaks and valleys. As they flew, Staff Sergeant Lopez moved to the cockpit area. He was a veteran of multiple combat deployments and had flown in dozens of military aircraft over the years. "Captain, I've got to say, this bird is impressive. I've never been in anything this smooth and quiet. How fast are we going?" Sarah checked her airspeed indicator. "About 160 knots. The Griffin can do over 200 if we need it, but we're cruising at an efficient speed to conserve fuel. And those defensive systems you mentioned in the briefing, how do they work?" Sarah was happy to explain the Griffin's capabilities. The aircraft has multiple layers of protection. First, we have the stealth coating and design that makes us very hard to detect on radar. Second, we have electronic countermeasures that can jam enemy communications and targeting systems. Third, we have flare dispensers and chaff systems that can confuse incoming missiles. And finally, we have armor plating that can stop small arms fire and shrapnel. Lopez nodded approvingly. "Sounds like you could fly through just about anything." "That's the idea. But the best defense is not getting into trouble in the first place, which is why we're taking this route." The conversation was interrupted by another radio transmission. "Griffin 1, Overwatch. Be advised we have confirmed hostile activity in your original flight path. Intelligence indicates the contacts were setting up an ambush position with shoulder-fired missiles. Your decision to take the alternate route appears to have been the correct one." Sarah felt vindicated, but tried not to show it. She had made the right call, but she knew that one good decision didn't prove anything in the long term. She still had to get them safely to Charlie Base, and then back home. The terrain below them began to change as they descended from the mountains toward the desert region where Charlie Base was located. Sarah could see the base in the distance, a collection of tangent-colored buildings and defensive positions that blended into the surrounding landscape. As they approached for landing, Sarah noticed increased activity around the base perimeter. There were more guards posted than usual, and she could see additional vehicles positioned at strategic points around the facility. Charlie Base, Griffin 1, requesting permission to land. Griffin 1, Charlie Base. You are cleared for landing on Helipad 2. Be advised we are at elevated security status due to increased threat levels in the region. Sarah brought the Griffin down smoothly on the designated landing pad. As the rotors spooled down, she could see base personnel moving toward them with the usual security escort that accompanied high-ranking visitors. General Hayes gathered her materials and prepared to disembark. "Excellent flying, Captain. Your decision to take the alternate route was exactly right. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be here when you're ready to return." The visit at Charlie Base lasted longer than planned. Sarah used the time to refuel the Griffin and conduct a thorough inspection of all systems. Chief Warrant Officer Peters, the base maintenance chief, was fascinated by the Griffin's advanced technology. "I've worked on helicopters for 20 years, but I've never seen anything like this," Peters said as he examined the aircraft's sensor arrays. "The precision of these instruments is incredible. You can probably detect a vehicle from 50 miles away." "The system is pretty impressive," Sarah agreed. "It gives us a huge advantage in situational awareness. We can see threats long before they can see us." While they talked, Sarah noticed a commotion near the base communications center. Personnel were moving with increased urgency, and she could see officers gathering for what appeared to be an emergency briefing. Major Williams approached the helicopter looking concerned. "Captain, we may have a problem. Intelligence has intercepted communications suggesting that hostile forces know about General Hayes' visit and are planning some kind of operation." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of operation? We're not sure yet, but the base commander is recommending that we consider staying here overnight and departing tomorrow morning when they can provide additional security escorts." Sarah looked at the Griffin's fuel gauges and flight systems. Everything was functioning perfectly, and they had enough fuel to return to their home base with a comfortable margin of safety. The question was whether it was safer to stay or go. What does General Hayes want to do? She's discussing options with the base commander now, but she asked me to get your assessment of the aircraft's readiness and the flight conditions. Sarah considered the situation carefully. The Griffin was operating flawlessly. Weather conditions were excellent, and they could choose from multiple routes back to base. On the other hand, staying overnight would give hostile forces more time to plan and position themselves for an attack. From a purely technical standpoint, we're ready to depart whenever General Hayes decides. The aircraft is fully operational. We have good weather, and we can take any of several routes back to base. The Griffin's defensive systems give us significant advantages if we do encounter any threats. Major Williams nodded and returned to the command center to relay her assessment. Sarah continued her inspection of the aircraft while thinking about the tactical situation. She had trained for scenarios like this, but training exercises couldn't replicate the real pressure of knowing that people's lives depended on her decisions. 20 minutes later, General Hayes emerged from the command center with a determined expression. "Captain, we're departing immediately. The base commander has given us updated intelligence on hostile positions, and we've identified a route that should avoid any known threats." "Yes, ma'am. We'll be ready to depart in 5 minutes." As the passengers boarded, Sarah could sense the increased tension. The casual atmosphere of the morning flight had been replaced by the focused alertness that came with a genuine threat situation. Staff Sergeant Lopez and Corporal Johnson checked their weapons and communications equipment, while Major Williams coordinated with various command centers. Sarah completed her pre-flight checklist with extra care, double-checking every system and making sure that all defensive measures were armed and ready. The Griffin's computer systems showed green lights across the board, indicating that all equipment was functioning within normal parameters. Charlie Base, Griffin 1, requesting clearance for departure. Griffin 1, you are cleared for immediate departure. Fly safe and watch your 6. Sarah lifted off and immediately began climbing to cruising altitude. The flight plan called for them to fly southeast for about 50 miles, then turn northeast toward home base. Intelligence reports showed no hostile activity along this route, but Sarah knew that situations could change quickly. As they gained altitude, she activated the Griffin's long-range sensors and began scanning the terrain ahead. The system could detect vehicles, aircraft, and even individual personnel at extreme distances, giving them advance warning of any potential threats. For the first 30 minutes, everything went smoothly. They flew over sparsely populated desert terrain, with excellent visibility and calm air. Sarah began to think that they might make it home without incident. Then the Griffin's threat detection system began beeping urgently. The threat warning system filled Sarah's headset with urgent beeps, while red indicators flashed across her tactical display. Multiple contacts were appearing on the screen, moving in patterns that the aircraft's computer identified as hostile. Multiple missile launches detected. Incoming projectiles from bearing 270. Time to impact approximately 45 seconds. Sarah's hands flew across the controls as years of training took over. She threw the Griffin into a sharp banking turn while simultaneously activating the countermeasures systems. Flares and chaff began deploying automatically, creating false targets to confuse incoming missiles. "All passengers, brace for evasive maneuvers," Sarah announced over the intercom, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. In the passenger compartment, General Hayes gripped her seat restraints while Staff Sergeant Lopez and Corporal Johnson moved to the windows, trying to spot the source of the attack. Major Williams was speaking rapidly into his radio, calling for support and updating command on their situation. The Griffin's electronic warfare systems came online, sending out jamming signals to disrupt enemy targeting systems. Sarah could see on her instruments that the aircraft's defensive measures were working, but she knew they weren't out of danger yet. Threat system reports missile impact in chaff cloud. No damage to aircraft, the Griffin's computer announced in its calm, synthetic voice. Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of relief before focusing on the next challenge. The missiles had missed, but whoever fired them now knew exactly where they were. She needed to get the Griffin away from the area as quickly as possible, while maintaining enough altitude to avoid small arms fire. Griffin 1. This is Overwatch. We show you under attack. What is your status? Overwatch, Griffin 1. We have successfully evaded missile attack and are proceeding away from the threat area. All systems operational. No damage to aircraft or personnel. Roger, Griffin 1. We are scrambling fighter support and ground units to your location. Estimated time of arrival for air support is 15 minutes. Sarah calculated quickly. 15 minutes was a long time when people on the ground were trying to kill you. She needed to find a way to keep the Griffins safe until help arrived. The aircraft's sensors were tracking the hostile contacts below. Sarah could see 3 vehicles moving rapidly across the desert terrain, trying to get into position for another attack. The Griffins' advanced targeting system was providing detailed information about their location and movement patterns. Captain, Staff Sergeant Lopez, called from the passenger area. I can see muzzle flashes from the vehicles down there. Looks like they're firing small arms at us. Sarah checked her altitude. They were high enough that small arms fire shouldn't be a threat, but she increased their altitude anyway. The Griffin could operate effectively at much higher altitudes than most helicopters, and the additional height would give them more safety margin. As they climbed, the threat warning system activated again. Additional missile launch detected. Multiple projectiles incoming from bearing 180. This time Sarah was ready. She had been monitoring the vehicles below and had anticipated that they might try to coordinate attacks from multiple directions. The Griffin dove toward the ground while deploying another spread of countermeasures. The aircraft's advanced flight control systems allowed Sarah to perform maneuvers that would have been impossible in a conventional helicopter. She pulled the Griffin through a series of rapid direction changes that would have torn apart most aircraft, but the Griffin's reinforced structure and sophisticated stabilization systems kept them flying smoothly. General Hayes watched from her seat with obvious admiration. She had flown in many military aircraft over her career, but she had never experienced flying like this. The pilot was demonstrating skills that went far beyond anything she had seen in training exercises or routine missions. Second missile salvo defeated, the Griffin system announced. No impact, no damage detected. Sarah began to feel more confident. The Griffin's defensive systems were performing exactly as designed, and she was beginning to understand how to use the aircraft's capabilities to maximum advantage. But she also knew that they couldn't keep dodging missiles indefinitely. Eventually, their luck would run out, or they would run low on countermeasures. Overwatch, Griffin 1. Can you provide precise coordinates on those hostile vehicles? I want to make sure we stay well clear of their operational range. Griffin 1. We show 3 vehicles at coordinates. The transmission was cut off by a burst of static. Sarah tried to re-establish contact with Overwatch, but her communications were being jammed. The hostile forces below had electronic warfare capabilities of their own, and they were using them to isolate the Griffin from outside support. Without communications, Sarah would have to rely entirely on the Griffin's onboard systems and her own judgment to navigate the threat. She studied the tactical display, looking for patterns in the enemy movements that might give her an advantage. The 3 vehicles were moving in a coordinated formation, trying to surround the Griffin and force it into a position where they could launch a concentrated attack. Sarah realized that she needed to break out of their encirclement before they could complete their positioning. Major Williams, she called back to the passenger area. Are you getting any communications from command? Negative, Captain. All frequencies are being jammed. We're on our own until we can get out of range of their jamming equipment. Crazer. Sarah made a quick decision. Instead of trying to avoid the hostile vehicles, she would use the Griffin's speed and maneuverability to break through their formation and escape to an area where communications might be possible. She pushed the Griffin's engines to maximum power and dove toward the ground at high speed. The aircraft screamed toward the desert floor while Sarah calculated intercept angles and escape routes. The hostile vehicles detected her change in tactics and began moving to intercept her flight path. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from multiple weapons as they fired at the approaching helicopter. At the last moment, she pulled the Griffin out of its dive and skimmed across the desert surface at nearly 200 knots. The aircraft's stealth characteristics made it difficult for the enemy gunners to track, and most of their fire went wide. Sarah flew directly over one of the hostile vehicles, close enough that she could see the surprised faces of the gunners looking up at her. The Griffin's powerful rotors created a massive dust cloud that temporarily blinded the enemy position. As they cleared the hostile formation, Sarah could see open desert stretching ahead of them. She climbed back to a safe altitude while monitoring her instruments for any signs of pursuit. "Threat warning clear," the Griffin's computer announced. "No hostile contacts detected within sensor range." Sarah tried the radio again and was relieved to hear Overwatch's voice coming through clearly. "Griffin 1, Overwatch. We lost contact with you for several minutes. What is your status?" "Overwatch, Griffin 1. We successfully evaded the hostile formation and are proceeding toward home base. No damage to aircraft. All personnel safe. Outstanding work, Griffin 1. Fighter support is still en route to your previous position. Do you require assistance?" Sarah checked her fuel gauges and navigation systems. They had used more fuel than planned during the evasive maneuvers, but they still had enough to reach home base with a comfortable margin. "Negative, Overwatch. We are proceeding independently to home base. Estimated arrival time in 90 minutes. Roger, Griffin 1. Safe flight home." As the immediate danger receded, Sarah became aware of the silence in the passenger compartment. She turned to see General Hayes, Major Williams, and the two soldiers all staring at her with expressions of amazement. General Hayes was the first to speak. "Captain, that was some of the finest flying I have ever seen. How did you know to fly directly at those vehicles instead of away from them?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush with the compliment. "Ma'am, I studied the tactical situation and realized that they were trying to surround us. The only way to break out of their encirclement was to punch through their formation before they could complete their positioning. And flying that low over the desert? Wasn't that extremely dangerous?" "It was calculated risk, General. The Griffin's flight systems can handle low-altitude flight, and staying close to the ground made it harder for them to target us with missiles. Plus, flying directly over their position created confusion and gave us the element of surprise." Staff Sergeant Lopez shook his head in disbelief. "Captain, I've been in combat situations all over the world, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. You turned that helicopter into a fighter aircraft." Corporal Johnson nodded in agreement. "Those maneuvers you pulled would have torn apart most helicopters. How does this bird handle that kind of stress?" Sarah was happy to explain the Griffin's capabilities. "The aircraft is designed for exactly this type of situation. The airframe can handle G-forces that would destroy conventional helicopters, and the flight control systems automatically compensate for extreme maneuvers. But you still need to know the aircraft's limits and stay within them." Major Williams had been quiet during the exchange, but now he leaned forward with a thoughtful expression. "Captain, I have to ask, have you ever been in a real combat situation before this mission?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. This was the question that had been following her throughout her career. "No, sir. This was my first time under actual hostile fire." Quote, the admission hung in the air for a moment. Everyone in the passenger compartment knew that her critics had questioned her readiness for exactly this type of situation. General Hayes broke the silence. "Well, Captain, if this is how you perform in your first combat situation, I can't imagine what you'll be capable of with more experience." The compliment meant more to Sarah than any medal or commendation could have. General Hayes was known for her high standards and direct manner. If she was impressed, it meant that Sarah had truly proven herself. As they continued toward home base, Sarah reflected on what had happened. The mission had gone from routine VIP transport to life-threatening combat situation in a matter of minutes. She had been forced to make split-second decisions that could have resulted in the death of one of the military's most senior officers, but she had succeeded. Not only had she kept everyone safe, but she had demonstrated capabilities that surprised even herself. The Griffin had performed flawlessly, but more importantly, she had proven that she could handle the pressure of real combat. The radio crackled with a transmission from home base. "Griffin 1. This is Control Tower. We have been monitoring your situation. Are you declaring an emergency?" "Control Tower, Griffin 1. No emergency to declare. We encountered hostile activity but successfully evaded, with no damage or casualties. Requesting priority landing clearance. Griffin 1. You are cleared for immediate landing on your approach. Emergency crews are standing by as a precaution. As the familiar outline of Blackwater Military Base appeared on the horizon, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. They had completed the mission successfully despite facing the exact type of situation that her critics had worried about. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she belonged in the cockpit of the military's most advanced helicopter. The doubts and insecurities that had plagued her throughout her career were finally beginning to fade, but as they approached the base for landing, Sarah had no idea that their ordeal was far from over. The landing at Blackwater Military Base should have been routine, but Sarah noticed something wrong as soon as they came within sight of the facility. Instead of normal base operations, she could see unusual activity around the perimeter. Additional security vehicles were positioned at strategic points, and more personnel than usual were visible around the runways and hangars. Control Tower. Griffin 1. I notice increased security activity on base. Is there a specific threat situation we should be aware of? Wen.4. Wen.4. Griffin 1. Control Tower. Proceed to Hangar 7 for landing. Security briefing will be provided after you shut down. The response was more formal than usual, and Sarah could detect tension in the air traffic controller's voice. Something was definitely happening at the base, but she wouldn't know what until they landed. As Sarah brought the Griffin down toward Hangar 7, she could see Colonel Martinez waiting with a group of officers and security personnel. The reception was much larger than normal for a returning VIP flight, which suggested that news of their combat encounter had already reached base command. The Griffin touched down smoothly on the hangar floor, and Sarah began the shutdown sequence. As the rotors spun down, she could see General Hayes gathering her materials and preparing to disembark, but her usual calm demeanor seemed slightly strained. Colonel Martinez approached the aircraft as soon as the rotors stopped turning. His expression was serious, and he was accompanied by several officers that Sarah didn't recognize. Behind them, she could see additional security personnel maintaining a protective perimeter around the hangar. General Hayes stepped out of the Griffin first, immediately moving toward Colonel Martinez. Colonel, what's the situation here? General, we need to get you to a secure location immediately. We've received intelligence indicating that the attack you experienced was part of a larger operation. There may be additional threats directed specifically at you. Sarah remained in the cockpit, monitoring her instruments and preparing to shut down the Griffin systems completely. But she kept her headset on so she could hear the conversation taking place outside the aircraft. Major Williams joined the discussion. What kind of additional threats are we talking about? One of the unfamiliar officers, wearing the insignia of military intelligence, stepped forward. We've intercepted communications, suggesting that hostile forces have detailed information about General Hayes' schedule and movements. The attack you encountered was likely a backup plan after their primary operation failed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If the enemy had detailed intelligence about the general's movements, it meant they had been planning this operation for some time. It also meant that the base itself might not be completely secure. What was their primary operation? General Hayes asked. We believe they were planning to attack the base itself while you were here, the intelligence officer replied. We've increased security and initiated lockdown procedures, but we can't be certain that all threats have been neutralized. Colonel Martinez turned toward the Griffin. Captain Chen, we need you to keep the aircraft ready for immediate departure. We may need to evacuate General Hayes to a more secure location. We need you to keep the aircraft ready. We may need to evacuate General Hayes. Sarah completed her shutdown checklist but left the aircraft's main systems in standby mode so they could restart quickly if necessary. She climbed out of the cockpit and joined the group for a more detailed briefing. Captain, the intelligence officer said, we understand you performed exceptionally well during the attack. Can you provide any details about the hostile forces you encountered that might help us assess the current threat level? Sarah organized her thoughts carefully before responding. Sir, we encountered at least 3 vehicles with coordinated tactics and sophisticated weapon systems. They had shoulder-fired missiles, electronic warfare capabilities, and demonstrated knowledge of our flight plan and timing. This wasn't a random attack by local insurgents. This was a well-planned military operation. The intelligence officer nodded grimly. That confirms our assessment. We believe you were facing a special operations unit with advanced equipment and training. General Hayes looked thoughtful. If they have that level of capability and organization, what's to stop them from attacking this base? Nothing, ma'am, Colonel Martinez replied honestly. That's why we're recommending immediate evacuation to a more secure facility. Where would we go? Major Williams asked. Andrews Air Force Base has the highest security rating in the region, the intelligence officer explained. We can have you there in 90 minutes if we leave immediately. Sarah studied the faces around her, trying to read the situation. Everyone seemed genuinely concerned about the threat level, but she also sensed that there might be disagreement about the best course of action. General Hayes was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her options. Colonel Martinez, what's your honest assessment of this base's defensive capabilities? Ma'am, we have excellent security under normal circumstances. But if we're facing a determined attack by Special Operations Forces with advanced weapons, I can't guarantee your safety here. And, Captain Chen, General Hayes turned to Sarah. What's your assessment of the Griffin's readiness for another flight? Sarah was surprised to be asked for her opinion again, but she appreciated the general's confidence in her judgment. Ma'am, the aircraft is fully operational. We have enough fuel for the flight to Andrews, and all defensive systems are functioning normally. If we do encounter additional threats, the Griffin gives us significant advantages in speed and defensive capabilities. But you've already been through one combat situation today, Major Williams pointed out. Are you sure you're ready for another potential engagement? Sarah considered the question honestly. She was tired, and the adrenaline from their earlier encounter was beginning to wear off. But she also felt more confident in her abilities and the Griffin's capabilities than she ever had before. Yes, sir, I'm ready. General Hayes made her decision. We'll go to Andrews. Captain, how long do you need to prepare for departure? 15 minutes, ma'am. Just enough time to top off our fuel and run a quick systems check. As the group began moving toward the base operations center to coordinate the evacuation, Sarah returned to the Griffin to begin preparations. Chief Torres appeared with a fuel truck and a team of technicians to assist with the pre-flight inspection. Heard you had some excitement out there, Torres said as he began connecting the fuel lines. You could say that. How much of the story has made it around the base? Word is you flew through a missile attack and came out without a scratch. People are saying you pulled off maneuvers that shouldn't be possible in a helicopter. Sarah felt embarrassed by the attention. The Griffin did most of the work. The aircraft's systems are incredible. Torres gave her a knowing look. The aircraft doesn't fly itself, Captain. You made the decisions and executed the maneuvers. Give yourself some credit. While the Griffin was being refueled, Sarah noticed increased activity around the base perimeter. Additional guard posts were being manned, and she could see armored vehicles moving into defensive positions. Whatever the intelligence services had discovered, Base Command was taking it very seriously. 20 minutes later, General Hayes and her party returned to the hangar. The general looked determined but calm, while Major Williams appeared more tense than usual. Staff Sergeant Lopez and Corporal Johnson were carrying additional weapons and equipment, suggesting they were preparing for the possibility of another engagement. Captain, are we ready to depart? General Hayes asked. Yes, ma'am. All systems are green, and we have full fuel. As they boarded the Griffin, Sarah could hear radio chatter from base security forces. The communications were in code, but the urgency in the voices was unmistakable. Something was happening, and it was happening fast. Sarah started the Griffin's engines and began her pre-flight checks with more urgency than usual. She wanted to get airborne as quickly as possible, both to ensure General Hayes' safety and to avoid whatever threat might be approaching the base. Control Tower. Griffin 1 requesting immediate departure clearance. Griffin 1. You are cleared for immediate departure. Be advised we have unconfirmed reports of hostile activity in the surrounding area. Maintain maximum altitude and proceed directly to your destination. Sarah lifted off quickly and climbed steeply to maximum operating altitude. As they rose above the base, she could see the full extent of the security preparations below. It looked like the base was preparing for an attack. They had been airborne for about 10 minutes when the radio crackled with an urgent transmission. Griffin 1, this is Blackwater Control. We are under attack. Multiple hostile contacts approaching from the northeast. You are ordered to continue to your destination and do not return to base under any circumstances. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The base where they had just been was now under attack. If they had delayed their departure by even a few minutes, they might have been caught in the middle of a battle. Griffin 1 copies, proceeding to destination as ordered. In the passenger compartment, General Hayes was listening to the radio traffic with a grim expression. The attack on the base confirmed that they were dealing with a highly organized enemy with significant resources and intelligence capabilities. Captain, General Hayes called forward, any chance they might try to intercept us en route to Andrews? Sarah checked her navigation systems and calculated their flight path. It's possible, ma'am. But they would need to know our exact route and timing. We're flying high and fast, which makes interception more difficult. And if they do try to intercept us, the Griffin can outrun most aircraft, and our defensive systems can handle missiles. But the best defense is avoiding contact altogether. Sarah activated the aircraft's long-range sensors and began scanning the airspace ahead of them. The system could detect aircraft at extreme distances, giving them advance warning of any potential threats. For the next hour, they flew through clear skies with no sign of hostile activity. Sarah began to hope that they would reach Andrews without further incident, but her optimism was shattered when the threat warning system suddenly activated. Multiple aircraft contacts detected. Range 15 miles and closing fast. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she checked her tactical display. 3 fast-moving contacts were approaching from the northwest, flying in a formation that suggested military aircraft rather than civilian traffic. Griffin 1, this is Viper Flight. We are F-16 seconds scrambled to provide you with escort. Do not take any evasive action. We are friendly forces. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The approaching aircraft were American fighters sent to protect them, not enemy interceptors trying to shoot them down. Viper Flight, Griffin 1. Very glad to see you. Griffin 1, we'll be providing escort for the remainder of your flight. Andrews is expecting you and has cleared the airspace for immediate landing. With fighter escort, the rest of the flight passed without incident. As they approached Andrews Air Force Base, Sarah could see that the facility was also at elevated security status, with additional air patrols and ground defenses visible around the perimeter. The landing at Andrews was smooth and professional. As soon as they touched down, the Griffin was immediately surrounded by security vehicles and personnel. General Hayes was escorted away for debriefing, while Sarah began the post-flight inspection of the aircraft. Colonel Martinez had flown to Andrews on another aircraft and approached Sarah as she completed her shutdown procedures. Captain, I want you to know that your performance today was exceptional. You handled 2 separate threat situations with skill and professionalism that exceeded everyone's expectations. Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing much more than your job. You proved today that the Griffin program has the right pilot, and you proved that the military made the right decision in giving women the opportunity to serve in combat roles. The compliment was more meaningful than any medal could have been. Sarah had set out that morning to prove herself worthy of flying the Griffin. By the end of the day, she had proven herself worthy of much more than that. As she looked back at the Griffin sitting under the bright lights of the hangar, Sarah realized that her career had changed forever. She was no longer the female pilot who had been given a chance because of politics or publicity. She was the pilot who had saved a general's life and proven that skill and courage mattered more than gender. But even as she savored the moment of triumph, Sarah knew that the real test would come in the days and weeks ahead. Today's events would be analyzed and debated, and there would always be those who questioned whether she had truly earned her place or simply gotten lucky. The answer to that question would come sooner than she expected. 3 weeks after the mission that nearly cost General Hayes her life, Sarah found herself in the most unexpected place possible, testifying before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C. The room was packed with reporters, military officials, and politicians, all there to hear about the Griffin HX-9 program and the events that had thrust both the aircraft and its pilot into the national spotlight. Sarah sat at a witness table facing a panel of senators and representatives, wearing her dress uniform with ribbons that now included the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Bronze Star with Valor. The medals felt heavy on her chest, not because of their physical weight, but because of what they represented. Committee Chairman Senator Richards leaned forward at the microphone. "Captain Chen, thank you for appearing before this committee today. Your actions 3 weeks ago have raised important questions about military readiness, aircraft procurement, and personnel policies. Let's start with the basic facts. Can you describe what happened during General Hayes' transport mission?" Sarah had rehearsed this testimony many times, but sitting in front of the cameras and facing the scrutiny of Congress was still intimidating. "Yes, sir. On the morning of October 15th, I was assigned to transport General Hayes to 3 forward operating bases using the Griffin HX-9 stealth helicopter. During the return flight, we encountered hostile forces armed with surface-to-air missiles and coordinated tactics. And how did you respond to this threat?" "I utilized the Griffin's defensive systems and maneuverability to evade the missile attacks and safely extract General Hayes and her party from the danger zone." Senator Williams, the ranking minority member, consulted her notes before speaking. "Captain, prior to this mission, you had never been in actual combat. Some critics have suggested that you were unprepared for this type of situation. How do you respond to that criticism?" This was the question Sarah had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Senator, it's true that this was my first time under hostile fire. However, I had undergone extensive training in combat scenarios and was thoroughly familiar with the Griffin's systems and capabilities. Training can never perfectly replicate real combat conditions, but it prepared me to make the right decisions under pressure." Representative Martinez from Texas leaned into his microphone. "Captain, there has been considerable debate about the military's policies regarding women in combat roles. Some argue that your success proves these policies are working, while others contend that you were simply lucky. What's your perspective?" Sarah chose her words carefully. This question went to the heart of debates that had been raging in military and political circles for years. "Sir, I believe that military assignments should be based on qualifications, training, and performance, rather than gender. I was selected for the Griffin program because of my flight record and technical knowledge. Not because I'm a woman. The fact that I was able to successfully complete the mission under combat conditions validates the selection criteria that were used." The questioning continued for over an hour, covering everything from the technical specifications of the Griffin to the broader implications of the mission for military policy. Sarah answered each question as honestly and professionally as possible, trying to stay focused on the facts rather than getting drawn into political debates. But the most challenging moment came when Senator Davidson, a vocal critic of women in combat roles, leaned forward with a skeptical expression. "Captain Chen, I've reviewed the mission reports, and I have to say that some of the maneuvers you claim to have performed seem extraordinary. Flying directly at enemy positions, evading multiple missile attacks, performing aerobatic maneuvers in a transport helicopter. Are we supposed to believe that a pilot with no combat experience suddenly became Tom Cruise in Top Gun?" The comment drew chuckles from some in the audience, but Sarah felt her face flush with anger. The senator was essentially calling her a liar in front of a national television audience. "Senator, every maneuver I performed has been verified by the aircraft's onboard recording systems and witnessed by General Hayes and her party. The Griffin HX-9 is specifically designed to perform the types of evasive actions that were necessary to complete the mission successfully. But surely you must admit that luck played a role in your success?" Sarah paused for a moment, considering her response carefully. This was her chance to address not just Senator Davidson's skepticism, but the doubts that had followed her throughout her career. "Senator, luck is always a factor in combat situations. But luck alone doesn't explain successful missile evasion, tactical decision-making under pressure, or the ability to operate complex aircraft systems while under fire. Those capabilities come from training, preparation, and experience. I may not have had combat experience before this mission, but I had years of training and hundreds of flight hours in various aircraft types. When the situation required it, that preparation allowed me to perform at the level needed to protect General Hayes and complete the mission. General Hayes herself was scheduled to testify later in the hearing, and when her turn came, she provided the most compelling testimony of the day. "Senators and representatives," General Hayes began. "I have flown in military aircraft for over 25 years and have worked with dozens of pilots in various situations. Captain Chen's performance during our mission was nothing short of extraordinary. She made split-second decisions that saved not only my life, but the lives of everyone on board. She demonstrated tactical awareness, technical proficiency, and courage under fire that would be impressive for any pilot, regardless of gender or experience level." The general paused and looked directly at Senator Davidson. "Sir, you questioned whether Captain Chen's success was due to luck. I was there. I saw her actions firsthand. What I witnessed was not luck. It was skill, preparation, and the kind of quick thinking that separates exceptional pilots from average ones." The hearing lasted most of the day, but by the time it was over, public opinion had clearly shifted in Sarah's favor. The combination of her professional testimony and General Hayes' strong endorsement had effectively silenced most of the critics. But for Sarah, the real validation came that evening when she received a phone call from Colonel Martinez. "Sarah, I wanted to call and let you know that the Griffin program has been approved for full production. The success of your mission convinced Congress that the aircraft represents a significant advancement in military capabilities." "That's great news, sir. The Griffin is an incredible aircraft. There's more," Colonel Martinez continued. "The Air Force has requested that you be assigned as the lead test pilot for the Griffin program. You'll be responsible for training other pilots and developing operational procedures for the aircraft." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This was the kind of assignment that pilots dreamed of, the chance to be involved in developing the future of military aviation. "Sir, I would be honored to accept that assignment. You've earned it, Sarah. Your actions over the past few weeks have proven that you're not just a competent pilot, you're an exceptional one." After the call ended, Sarah sat in her hotel room, thinking about how much her life had changed in such a short time. 3 weeks ago, she had been fighting for respect and credibility. Now, she was being offered one of the most prestigious assignments in military aviation. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came the next morning when she returned to Blackwater Military Base. As she walked through the hallways, she noticed a different attitude from her fellow officers. The skeptical looks and whispered comments had been replaced by nods of respect and acknowledgement. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had been one of her harshest critics, approached her in the officers' mess. "Captain Chen, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to question your assignment to the Griffin program. Your performance under fire proved that you belong in that cockpit." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I've been flying military aircraft for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you pulled off out there. You saved General Hayes' life and proved that the Griffin is everything we hoped it would be." The conversation was brief, but it represented a fundamental shift in how Sarah was perceived by her peers. She was no longer the female pilot who had been given a chance because of politics. She was the pilot who had proven herself under the most demanding circumstances possible. Later that day, Sarah returned to Hangar 7, where the Griffin sat under bright lights, its black surface gleaming. Chief Torres was there, as always, performing routine maintenance on the aircraft. "How does it feel to be famous?" Torres asked with a grin. "Honestly, a little overwhelming. I never expected all this attention. You better get used to it. Word is that you're going to be training the next generation of Griffin pilots. That's a big responsibility." Sarah nodded, looking at the aircraft that had become such an important part of her life. "I just want to make sure that everyone who flies the Griffin gets the same training and preparation that helped me succeed. They will, and they'll have the best instructor possible." As Sarah stood there looking at the Griffin, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had started as a pilot trying to prove that she deserved a chance. She had ended up proving that excellence has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, preparation, and courage. The attacks on General Hayes had been intended to demonstrate that women weren't capable of handling combat situations. Instead, they had proven exactly the opposite. Sarah's success had opened doors not just for herself, but for other women who wanted to serve their country in roles that had previously been closed to them. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a class of 12 pilots who had been selected for Griffin training. Half of them were women, a fact that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. But times were changing, and Sarah was proud to be part of that change. The Griffin HX-9 is the most advanced military helicopter ever built, she told the class. It will give you capabilities that previous generations of pilots could only dream of. But remember, the aircraft is only as good as the person flying it. Your job is to master every system, understand every limitation, and be prepared for any situation you might face. One of the students, a young woman named Lieutenant Rodriguez, raised her hand. Captain, what advice would you give to pilots who are facing skepticism about their abilities? Sarah smiled, remembering her own struggles with that same issue. My advice is simple. Focus on being the best pilot you can be. Master your craft, train harder than anyone else, and when the time comes to prove yourself, let your actions speak for you. The only opinion that matters is the one based on your performance, not your background. As she looked at the eager faces in front of her, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. She had not only proven herself capable of flying the Griffin, she had helped pave the way for others to follow. The laughter and skepticism that had greeted her assignment to the Griffin program now seemed like ancient history. In their place was respect earned through demonstrated competence and courage under fire. Sarah Chen had set out to prove that she deserved to fly the military's most advanced helicopter. In the end, she had proven something much more important. That in the modern military, what mattered most was not who you were, but what you could do when your country needed you most. The Griffin HX-9 program went on to become one of the most successful military aircraft initiatives in decades, with Sarah serving as chief test pilot and training instructor for 5 years. Her techniques and procedures became the standard for Griffin operations worldwide. And many of the pilots she trained went on to distinguished careers of their own. But for Sarah, the greatest satisfaction came from knowing that she had helped change perceptions about what was possible. The young women who entered military flight training no longer had to wonder whether they would be taken seriously or given real opportunities to serve. Sarah had proven that the sky was not the limit. It was just the beginning.